If you're struggling with maladaptive daydreaming, I want to give you 7 tips that have helped me at various times. Full disclosure, the best thing that's helped me is getting professional treatment, but I realise a lot of people are not at that stage, can't afford to get it, or for whatever reason are not ready to get that. So I just wanted to run through 7 ways that I've been able to minimise maladaptive daydreaming at different points in my life, and hope that some of them maybe work for you. The first one is really most effective, and you're maybe halfway there if you're looking for videos about maladaptive daydreaming and you're aware of that term. Before I think you know that term, then you're just completely isolated. You don't know what's going on. You have no understanding of what you're doing, really. You'll probably feel very alone, and like maladaptive daydreaming is just unique to you. That's how I felt for so many years, for over 20 years, about 25 years maybe. And then when I came across the term maladaptive daydreaming, it was like a real aha moment. So I would say the number 1 tip is become self-aware. And the reason that this works, I think, is that it takes some of the enjoyment out of the daydreaming, and that's really what you need to do if you want to stop. And I think the way to practice self-awareness is whenever you feel the daydreams come up, or when you are daydreaming, try to think about the fact that you're daydreaming, and maybe even try to attach it to what's going on and why it started. I think, when you're in a bad space, then you can feel like you're daydreaming literally all the time and that there's no triggers. I kind of felt that way when somebody wanted me to identify triggers. I really couldn't, because I felt I'm doing this all the time, so what are the triggers? But if you are able to cut it down, then you will start to see triggers, and you can think to yourself, I actually did this in my mind, where I would say, okay, I'm daydreaming now because I've become anxious because I need to do this thing. A lot of times if I had to interact in the real world for certain things, or do things that made me nervous or anxious, then the daydream would come up and be really intense. And if you can kind of say to yourself, I'm daydreaming because I know I'm doing this, because I think the more you become aware of your brain, and the more you can think about it more as a mental health problem and something that you are aware of and aware that your brain is doing, and not just something that's happening and you have no control of it. I know exactly what it's like to feel like you have no control and to feel like you daydream all the time. So these little times when you can eke out a little bit of self-awareness, I think it really helps. So the more and more you are able to do that, then that can help. Number 2 is actually stop indulging in your triggers. Now, this is really hard to do, but a lot of times when we maladaptive daydream, we have particular things that we're daydreaming about, and I think it's quite common that you will probably also indulge in enjoying those things, in terms of looking at them on social media, watching videos, watching YouTube stuff, really just, if like me, I kind of indulged in everything, and I couldn't really separate where the real life indulgement was happening and the daydreams were happening. Well, I could separate, but it was it never really occurred to me that if I truly stop engaging with the triggers, then will my daydreams dry up? Or if you keep indulging with the triggers, then you keep feeding the daydreams. It's really, really difficult. It's something I'm still experimenting with. I'm getting professional help, and I'm getting a lot of help right now, and daydreams have minimised, but I'm still trying to help myself by not indulging in triggers that I know would set off my daydreaming. I think, obviously people feel like they want to enjoy their interests, but for a lot of us, enjoying our interests just kind of spills over into becoming addictive, becoming an obsession, becoming something that we daydream about, and it becomes our whole world. So for me, I have taken quite a cold turkey approach. I've deleted Twitter, which was a big one for me, and just deleted other things and not looking at things. So there is a bit of pain involved in that, because I think, you do want to enjoy the things that you enjoy, but also you need to recognise that it is really hard to stop daydreaming if you keep feeding your daydreams, and that's where like your triggers will come in. Number 3 is similar to this. It's change your relationship to music. For a lot of us, music is a really strong trigger for daydreaming. When I was younger, I used to like pace up and down my room, and it would always involve music. Like I had particular songs that I knew were good for daydreaming, and I'm sure everyone who maladaptive daydreams probably has that. There's still songs I can think now, and it just will take me back to my bedroom when I was a child, running up and down the room, and daydreaming. And they were like good facilitators for the daydreams. In terms of music, when I stopped pacing, I was still, when I was listening to music walking down the street, it was again facilitating and triggering daydreams. So what I tried to do was either cut out music, try to listen to a podcast, or something that's really helpful for me is I'll listen to music that has evocative lyrics. So Taylor Swift's a good example. Like when you listen to her music, it's almost hard to daydream and get away because she tells stories so well that you are picturing what she tells. So if you can find music that will allow you just to engage in the story that's been told, and then you're more in the present because you're being, led somewhere. It's more like feeling in the flow and watching a movie, as opposed to when you put on the particular music that you're going to maladaptive daydream to, then there's kind of no surprise that you will maladaptive daydream. I think it's just one of those things, like we want to, obviously nobody should have to live without music or avoiding music. And that is one of these things where we need to figure out like where our line is and, what sets us off and what we can manage. So, as a personal line as to how much you cut out music, but definitely it helped for me to stop listening to particular music, or, to stop listening to music at certain times. So yeah, it's really just about, figuring out what works for you. Okay, number 4, make something negative happen in your daydreams, or look for something negative surrounding what you're daydreaming about. This is an interesting one because the couple of times I've managed to stop daydreaming, or I've recognised the daydreaming as a problem, has been when something negative has happened around the topic of my daydreams, or like the person. When something negative happens, you almost feel like, oh, why am I spending so much time thinking about this? Because, there's a link between your daydreams and this real person, even though you're creating something that's not real, but the link is still there. So if there is something negative that happens, it does impact you. There was a time when I was a teenager and I was maladaptive daydreaming about certain people, and then those certain people did something really not nice. And, for a while, I kind of felt like I was cured because I was like, I don't feel like doing that. I'm not even going to waste my energy thinking about them in my head anymore. And you almost feel like so disgusted that you don't want to daydream anymore. So I think it's a really helpful thing if you can actively engineer something negative. I've heard of people, they will like make a character, pass away in their mind, or that sounds so tragic. Even just if it's imaginary. But yeah, like whatever you need to do, I think the ultimate thing you want to do is make your daydreams less enjoyable, so you can kind of transition out of them and that they don't seem such a comforting place. Because I think, that's the thing about maladaptive daydreaming, and I describe it like this, is that it's very soothing until it becomes torturous. On the one hand, it's like one of our favourite things to do, and it's really a comfort to us, it's really soothing. And on the other hand, it's like our biggest problem. It's torturing our mind, it takes over our life, it's overwhelming really. So yeah, anything you can do to try and lessen the enjoyment and make it more of a burden that you can't cope with in order to want to get that help. I kind of needed to reach that point where I was like, something negative did happen, and I thought, it was making my daydreams negative, and I just thought like I can't cope with this anymore, and that's really what pushed me on to get professional help. And now, I'm feeling a lot better about things. 5, there's something I called the light switch method. This is something I used for a while, and it helped a little bit. This is basically where I use this lying in bed a lot. So there's a moment when you feel the daydreams coming on, and in that moment I pictured myself literally hitting a switch and turning it off, and I'd keep doing that. So I'd keep like picturing myself like literally jumping towards a switch and turning off the daydreaming. So if you can do that, and the minute you let the daydreams kind of seep in, they become so much harder to control. So this was my way of thinking, like the minute I feel it come on, I switch it off. If you allow it to come in, then it's so much harder to almost push back against it. Like once it's seeped into your brain, it's hard just to get rid of it and to stop. And particularly like once you start a storyline or once you start a scenario in your mind, it's almost like you feel you need to finish it. So the way around that is really to stop it before it goes any further. And for me, I don't know, like I started picturing myself like hitting a light switch, and that's why I call it the light switch method. Totally made up, I think, but it did help. Number 6 is you need to accept that your real life is not going to be exciting as your daydreams, or it's almost not going to feel as good in your daydreams, particularly if you daydream about a version of yourself. That version of yourself is always going to be better than it is in real life, or it's going to feel more comfortable. That's something that you really need to face and understand. And I think, something I'm trying just now is to learn to live in those moments of discomfort. I think, for so long, for like 25 years, the minute there is discomfort, I switch into daydreams. And that's made it really difficult to not want to do that, or, control the fact that that's happening. And I think the more that you can sit with uncomfortable feelings, that you can sit with discomfort, that you can ride the wave of like cringy or awkward moments, I found it really difficult to do that. I still find it difficult to do that. So that's like one of my challenges, and that's what I'm trying to do, is really learn to live in that discomfort and be okay. And again, the more time that you can kind of eke out of silence, discomfort, the kind of areas where like you would daydream, to fill that's a good time to recognize that, if I can like ride this wave and not fall into the daydream, then I can have a little bit more control. But the reality is you can make anything happen in your daydreams. Everyone will respond to you the way you want to in your daydreams. It's quite obvious that it's a safer and better place, and that real life does not work like that. So I think there needs to be some acceptance that you also need to work on yourself, or be okay with not being as confident as you feel, or not being as comfortable. So that's the challenge. I mean, I think for a lot of people, maladaptive daydreaming is really linked to low self-esteem and maybe depression, and it is related to other conditions. Like I've myself got OCD, and I know it's related to other conditions like ADHD and different things like that. So I think, something to think about is like what happens when you stop daydreaming, and, can you live in that moment? If you just feel bored when you stop daydreaming, then you've got a better chance, I think, of beating it and of working through it, because then, you just need to try to fill that gap. But if you become incredibly depressed when you stop daydreaming, then there is a bigger issue, and I think that is where you need professional help. So it's really important. You can't just stop daydreaming if it leads to something worse, and for me that's what was happening. So even when I was trying to beat the daydreaming, it was leading to other problems, and that's where I needed to get help. So for you, it's really important just to watch like what happens when you do stop daydreaming, how do you feel? But if you can live in difficult moments, if you can try to, get through boredom and kind of accept that life is not as exciting as your daydreams or as interesting, or, a lot of people daydream obviously to fulfill needs that are not being met in real life, and that's totally understandable. But the reality is we'll never meet them in real life if we live in our daydreams. That's, for me, really what's happened. A lot of things I wanted I've never achieved because, I feel I got overwhelmed in my internal life. So yeah, you can live in your daydreams for your life, but you will reach a point where you'll have some regret about that. That's sort of where I am right now. And number 7 is, again, kind of related to this, and it's make yourself visible. And this is really just a follow-on about how to live with yourself. Now, because a lot of us have low self-esteem or low confidence, we'll maybe feel invisible in real life. And I think, maladaptive daydream can make you feel like your real life doesn't exist. That's, I really got to that point where, I just felt I was like a container for stories, really. And I was just like a body that was walking stories around. That's really how I felt. I felt so invisible, or like the real me felt so invisible. I have moments, I'm lucky enough to have good friends and family, and I have moments where I feel like myself. And then I would go back, to being alone, and I would engage in my daydreaming, and I felt like I was disappearing. So when I say make yourself visible, for me, that's been making this channel, and it's not getting a lot of views, but that's fine. Like, I've made myself visible to myself. Like, I now got this little place where I can put myself as myself, and talk about things that matter to me. And, I can see myself physically somewhere, and I think that really matters. Because if you're living in your head all the time, especially if you're alone and you're isolated, like, you're not getting feedback on who you are as a person. So you can really just I really started to feel like I was fading away. That was how I was feeling. So, that was how I was feeling at the beginning of this year. At the beginning of this year, I decided to start the YouTube channel, and it's really helped me a lot just to kind of see myself almost, and to get out of my own head in that way. So I'm not suggesting that that's always going to be the answer, but one thing that I would suggest is, try to make something, produce something. A lot of people with maladaptive daydreaming are probably quite creative, so if you can try and put that into some writing, some art, put that out there. You want to try and experience life as yourself. Finding out the best way you can do that. And a lot of the times we've had to run from feeling like we don't relate to people, but there are people who relate to us, and we need to find those people, and put ourselves out there for those people. Like, you're being made to feel like you don't matter, or like you're not important, maybe because you feel like you don't fit into the way society is. But you do matter, and you are important, and there are people all over the world who will relate to you. I mean, maladaptive daydreaming, running around in your room, like gesturing and talking to yourself and daydreaming the way I was daydreaming. I thought I was the only person who did this. I really did. And finding out there's a whole load of people who do this, and people are even feeling or in places that I can recognise are almost worse than how I've felt. And that's just made me feel like really there are people out there who will relate to everything that you feel. Like, you're not alone, and you're probably not unique in any feeling that you've ever had. One of my favourite books about maladaptive daydreaming is Fernando Pessoa's The Book of Disquiet. I talk about that in another video, but that's a book that I relate to more than anything I've ever read, and that was written over 100 years ago. And it's just like, it's amazing when you know, people describe things that you are going through and that there are people out there, but you need to make yourself seen. You need to talk about the things that interest you. And that's the thing about, you know, trying to release yourself from your daydreams is, you know, you need to find things that interest you and be willing to speak about them, and put yourself out there. So I hope these tips have helped, and, you know, good luck with everything you're going through. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.